Could you answer that question on valuation, Tanya, and I'll shut up.
I'm wrestling with that as well, right? Because there's a couple of trains of thoughts. You're right. There are third-party companies that you can basically send and they'll plug and play and they're going to charge X amount of dollars for the service. And then I say to myself, well, I'm putting hours into doing the business evaluation myself. Should I be charging for that? Whether it's a small retainer and then maybe credit it back to the client upon selling the business. And I'll be honest, I'm wrestling with it. I'm not quite sure what I want to do because I find myself spending a good deal of time doing the business evaluations. At the same time, is that it's part of my job as a business broker to do it. So I'm wrestling with that for a little bit because I think that there's two types of business brokers, ones that'll charge for a business evaluation and ones that don't. And then I also think it comes down to a matter of how busy you are, right? So if you're working on a number of deals and you just don't have the time to focus in full-fledged into doing the business evaluation yourself, then maybe it does make sense to use a third party. And then, as you were mentioning, you got to make sure the third party knows what they're doing, right? You don't want to just entrust that, the trust and verify type of thing. But if you can't trust the third party, if you have to spend more time to verify it, it's sort of defeating the purpose. I don't have an easy answer, honestly, Dick. I'm still wrestling with that, and I'm strongly considering charging a nominal fee just to do the business evaluation twofold. Number one, to pay me for the time that I'm putting into it, and number two, to make sure that the other side has some skin in the game. I don't know what that figure is because I know different brokers will charge different prices of business evaluations based on what the price of the business is going to be sold for. I don't know. I mean, I honestly don't know.
I've got a question. There's a certified valuation. There's an uncertified valuation, right? What makes it certified? I would be totally uncertified, right? Mine would be
Right.
uncertified, no question. And that would be like $1,500 out there on the street, something for a certified if you buy it. Well, how about a certified? What do they do, Tanya, in your experience for a certified valuation?
They do a lot of the same things that we do in terms of looking for starting with the tax returns and analyzing the financials. But a certified business appraisal generally is going to be, what do they call it? USPAP compliant. So it's USPAP. It's going to be compliant with those standards. Okay. And there's a lot of disclaimers that they put in it, a lot of assumptions that they put in it. It's kind of like the difference between market comps, between having a real estate agent provide you with market comps for property versus having an actual appraisal go do the appraisal, right? It's different. You're all using the same comps. You probably are going to come up to pretty much the same value, but the appraiser is going to provide a report that's got a lot more detail, a lot more data, and that ultimately, potentially could be used in a court of law, that they would be used if they were expert witness and all of that, where the type of price analysis that we do as brokers, I'm looking at what can I sell this business for? I don't provide a detailed report. I don't provide any report, unless somebody's going to pay me, and I will charge for that. If I'm going to provide them with a physical report, then I will charge them, but I only can do that if they're not going to be listing the business. So, in California, we have different laws. Once you have a representation agreement signed, you can't charge any advance fees for anything that you're doing. So if you're going to do the valuation, you have to do the valuation before you ever have them sign a representation agreement.
Oh.
And then once you give them that valuation, they can turn around and take that to anybody they want and say, here's my valuation. And I want you to, they can take it to their neighbor that's a residential agent. Here, list my business. This is what the broker said it's worth. So I try and stay away from that. But if I know somebody is not going to sell the business, they want, that they're looking for the business value strictly to figure out, this is where I am right now. I'm looking for a target price that I know I haven't reached yet, but I want to work towards that. But I need to know, let's face it, if you're going to Disneyland or Disney World, you need to know whether you're starting in Texas or Minnesota, because you're taking a different route, right? Same destination, but you're taking a different route. So that's, under those circumstances, I'll go ahead and do a business price analysis, give them a written report, everything else. It tells them, here's what we can sell. Here's the, what we believe we could sell the business for today if we put it on the market, and here's why. So I'll do that for them if I know they're 2 or 3 years away from selling. But otherwise, a lot of times the difference between what the appraiser is going to give them, the appraiser is going to look at public data and public trends. I'm probably not looking at public companies because we're selling private companies. So why do I care what the public companies are doing? And those multiples are not typically applicable to the small businesses and lower middle market businesses. So it's kind of a why.
Where do you get your best information on how to evaluate a business, Tanya? Do you have any particular places that go to for you? If you're like, let's say in this dental lab, you've never done one, where would you go? Would you go to the IBBA? They've got, resources there.
Well, through CAB and the IBBA, that's how I learned how to value businesses in the first place. So, and then you go to Business Reference Guide to get some rules of thumb to make sure, as sanity checks. You might go to Vertical IQ or to First Research, but you can go to Deal Stats and look for comps. But you have to understand that business comps, there's no true business comps. I mean, because every business is unique.
Different, yeah.
Yeah. So you're generally looking at some multiple of earnings. Almost every business is going to sell on a multiple of earnings. If you took all of the businesses that were in biz comps and averaged out what the multiple of earnings is, you're going to get to about, in any given year, right? If you take that year, average out all the multiples and all that for each year, you'd almost always come up with about a 2.3 as the average.
So is that the number, kind of your go-to number, multiple on earnings, EBITDA?
No, I mean, and so your small businesses are valued on sellers discretionary earnings, so SDE, not EBITDA. And the only difference between SDE and EBITDA is that for SDE, you're adding one owner's compensation.
Oh, you're adding one owner's compensation.
Right. So if the owner is paying themselves, let's say your taxable income on your tax returns is $50,000 and the owner is paying themselves $100,000 and they have another, $20,000 of discretionary earnings, then basically you start with that taxable income, you add their discretionary add backs, then you add the one owner's compensation, and you come up with your So
you actually subtract the owners, right, from the earnings, is what you're saying?
no, you add it back. So if you start with a taxable income, basically they've expensed everything out as much as possible to give its tax mitigated value.
Their salary at that point is what you're saying.
Right.
And then
So you're basically trying to get back to a higher number before you apply a multiple.
I got
So when you have, so let's say if it was 50,000 in taxable income plus another 20,000 in miscellaneous expenses that were just at their discretionary expenses, and then their salaries at 100, now you have $170,000, which is your SDE, your seller's discretionary earnings. Then you're going to apply a multiple to that. And the multiple on 170 is going to be somewhere in the range of 2 to 2.5.
Yeah, 2 to 2.5.
Yeah, generally speaking.
Well,
unless you have
information.
Client concentration issues, unless you have, if the business is completely owner centric, the owner is the business, So those things,
are
and that's where
negative.
your valuation and your price analysis, it's kind of a part art, part science. See, the equation, your valuation equation is very simple, right?
Mhm.
Your valuation, your value is always going to be earnings times a multiple.
Yeah,
Your earnings is pretty easy to calculate. That's all math. You calculate that from your tax returns and your profit and loss statements, and you can go into detail on those. But so your earnings is really more science because it's all math. The
so,
multiple is where it's an art.
so one thing about earnings, like on this lab that comes up, right, is they don't own their own building, right? They lease.
Okay.
Their lease has only got 1 year left. They may have to go into a higher price property or
Mhm.
whatever. And maybe they have a sweetheart deal on this one. And so you have to analyze that lease payment too, right?
Yes. Yeah. So if they have it, do they have an option to extend? If so, have they exercised it? If not,
Yeah, they
what's
don't.
it going to cost them to relocate? Because your one-time relocation charge is not the issue, because that would be an add back as a one-time expense anyways. So that's not really the issue. The issue is going to be, what is the normalized rent going to be?
Yeah,
Moving forward, how much is the rent going to be?
exactly.
Because if it's doubling or tripling, then you've got a problem, because now your discretionary earnings that a buyer is going to have would be very different picture from what the seller currently has.
Well, we all know businesses that, in fact, I had one that I would have given you if you would have taken it, but you wouldn't have taken it because you would have had to pay the bank off. You would have had to, whatever. And, it was worth less. It was just better to close it down, right? Or whatever. So these are the things you have to tell owners sometimes. And I'm afraid that that's probably where we're headed on this lab, if I'm reading between the lines a little bit. But it's still a good exercise. I mean, it's important to understand what you've told me is really good information.
And the
See, part
short,
of the reason that I do the valuations myself is because I learn about the business. When you farm that off to somebody else and you just send the financials over, if they have questions, they're talking, they're the ones talking to the business owner. You're not learning anything. You're
Exactly.
not, so I really feel like I want to know as much about that business as possible. And part of what I learn about that business, I learn through their financials. I know what they're spending money on. I know, I learn whether or not they have somebody who is working in the business not being paid, or somebody who is being paid but is not actually working in the business. Those are all things that you find out by talking to the business owner when you're analyzing the financials. So I would say when you're new, you definitely want to do that yourself, because that's part of how you're going to learn what goes on in some of these businesses, so that you know what to ask the next seller that you're dealing with, so you don't have these surprises that crop up 2 days before closing that derail your transaction.